Well, good morning. Today we are doing a crash course in grafting. We're going to just run around and get her done. I've been meaning to do a full series on grafting for a couple, 2 years or so, but it's just too much to take on, so I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to run around and we're just going to pack it all in today if we can, deal with whatever crappy lighting we have, and just make it happen. So it may not be the exact thing I wanted to do, but in terms of content, it's going to be about 90% of the content of that, and the content is excellent. This will be probably 80% of what you ever need to know about grafting if you're a small-scale grower or a backyard orchardist. So first we're going to talk about what it is and why you should graft, because this is the most important. We need to convince you that this is worth learning. Since apples are mostly what I grow, I have the most experience with apples, I think about apples the most, I talk about apples the most, we're going to kind of build this around grafting apples. Pears are pretty much exactly the same. Quinces should be pretty much the same. Cherries and plums are pretty easy. Peaches, nectarines, and almonds are a little harder because the scions tend to dry out really easily. But I'm just going to approach this from the point of view of just apples because it's easy, and most of what you'll be learning can be applied to other grafting. Although some things like persimmons or walnuts or something are difficult and may require other techniques, which I also may or may not know, so I might not be able to cover them anyway. So grafting is taking a piece of one plant, surgically attaching it to another plant, and then it heals, heal a union between the two of them, and your new thing grows and produces fruit or whatever it is that you're grafting for. That can be done in various ways at various seasons, but we're going to be talking here about dormant grafting because it's the most common, useful, easy, etc. It's also easy to ship and store dormant wood. So what I mean when I say dormant is not that the tree is dormant, because this tree is in a great stage for grafting right now. It's totally fine. It's that the wood that you're grafting on is dormant. So you want to harvest that in the winter, and then you store it until it's time to graft, and then you graft it on. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just kind of run around, do some different examples on my property of why you would want to graft and things that I've done and the ways in which it's useful. To me, I just think of it as an essential skill for any backyard orchardist, homesteader, a hobby orchardist, or small-scale commercial grower even. It's just so useful and so versatile and allows you so much room for variety and options and changing things. Now, if it was really difficult or something, it might be easy to see it a different way, and I think a lot of people probably perceive it that way. It seems amazing that you can just take a piece of one tree and stick it on another one and have it grow. But it really can be quite easy, especially with apples and pears. Okay, I started my last video here with this tree. I'm going to talk about this again. Now, this tree was grafted to Waltana. I took a rootstock and I grafted on a scion, and I planted it here, and it grew. And the next year I heard about a different apple that I wanted to try, Tideman's Late Orange. So I grafted Tideman's Late Orange on there, grew a whole tree. When it fruited, I didn't like the fruit. I let it fruit for multiple years, and it just never was any good. It always cracked. So at some point I was just like, this is a total loss, but I don't want to waste this. Look, I have this established root system here. I'm in this framework that I already built, and why start over? It took probably 5 or 6 years or something for this to come into bearing in the first place. I'm already thinking about adding or changing this tree. Totally fine. As the branch structure grows out, I can just add to the branch structure instead of cutting it all the way back. If I didn't know how to graft, I'd either have to live with these apples that crack every year, like almost every single apple cracked every year. Or I cut it off, not just cut it off, but actually dig out the root system and then start over, or I can graft it. I think people tend to think of trees as these kind of monoliths or, fixtures that are there, but think of it more like the tree as a canvas. That's kind of how I've come to think of it over the years more and more, until I just realized that I have pretty much unlimited options with what I do with this tree. I could change this all over this year right now to just super late varieties, and I have another tree up there that's just super late varieties. Now the tree behind me is the original Franken tree. So that one was a seedling, or a rootstock sucker, and it just produced these like sour green apples, totally useless. and I grafted it completely over the first year to all new varieties, and now it has 150 varieties. I have apples off it for 6 months out of the year. The pollination is excellent because there's just so many different varieties right next to each other. And of course there's a huge amount of variety of all different types of apples to suit your tastes. Also, it is a great way to experiment and just collect. You know, collecting apples is super fun. It's like you get to go, you know, learn about new apples and research them, but you don't even get to try them until you graft them for a while and then grow them. It's always like a treasure hunt and a surprise when something finally fruits. It's just exciting and something to keep your mind occupied and something to look forward to, and it gets you outside and engaged in life and thinking about things and working with plants and stuff, and that's all good. That's just all good. This whole branch behind me is my new seedling, Bite Me. It was grown from a Wixen seed, and so now I have a new variety. What do I do with that? If you want to grow this, you have to get a scion from me and graft it. That's the only way to do it. I don't sell grafted trees yet. You grow something from seed, you know, you breed a new variety. I have like a whole program going here to breed new varieties. So I come up with something good. How do we get that out to people? Well, it has to be grafted at some point. So I either have to graft trees or I have to get it to someone else and they graft trees, or I send out scions and you guys just graft them. That's why you can grow an apple from the 1400s that has been continuously propagated and cloned over and over and over again. If you grow a new apple from seed, it's genetically unique. The way that we propagate that is by cuttings or by grafting. It is possible to root some fruit trees, and it is possible to root apples. Some root easily and some don't. But typically they're grafted more often. It's easier and it's more versatile and it's quicker. Of course, another reason to graft is that we can choose the rootstock we want, but we'll talk about that presently. This tree here started out as Edward's Fine Winter, and it looked really promising, but over time I just kind of decided I didn't like it. And I have tons and tons of varieties here that I've done research on or gotten strong recommendations on that just didn't work out. After lots of research, I've ended up grafting them all over to different stuff, you know, most of them anyway. This is one of my best growing trees. It just grew really nicely. The framework is perfect. It grew faster and healthier, and it was bearing very nicely. So I frameworked it, which means that I took, you know, I kept the main branch structure and I just added scions all over the tree of the same variety, and in 2 years I started to get fruit, and now it's in full fruit. I'm also housing some seedlings on this tree. For instance, I have 3 different red flesh seedlings that I'm growing on this tree and just waiting for those to come into bearing. So that's another way you can use a full framework tree, is to try out seedlings. So if you wanted to grow some apples from seed and you have a big tree like this, especially if it's something that you don't even like in the first place, then you can grow your seedlings, cut them off the first year and graft them onto this, and they'll eventually come into bearing. Again, think of it as a canvas, think of it as an opportunity, not a fixture. Alright, this is my apple breeding area. This is where I plant the trees after I've made the pollinations and grown the seeds out. I plant them here and they grow, and each one of these is genetically unique. So when they start to produce fruit, I'll say I like this one, I don't like this one, we'll cut that one down, we're going to assess this one further. When I finally say this is a winner, we're going to name this and get it out to people, what do? Okay, there's 2 basic options. You can grow roots from the stems themselves and have a tree on its own roots, or you can graft it onto another kind of root and get that to people, or send them scions and they graft it onto something. Apples typically are not the easiest thing to grow on their own roots, but there's methods you can use to do that. Now, some people will argue that trees on their own roots are better, and I think that's cool. There's kind of a movement towards that now. But don't think of it as that's better, so you should never graft. Grafting is an excellent tool to have in your toolbox. Like I said, you can actually use it to grow trees on their own roots. I'll talk about that in a bit. But also there's other things to think about. There's convenience, there's ease, there's what can other people deal with. You know, can other people grow the trees from roots? Do I have time to air layer a ton of scions? You need grafting as a tool in your toolbox. What if you want to grow trees on their own roots, but you don't know what you want to grow yet? So you collect a bunch of varieties, you graft them onto an established tree, say, or grow them in cordon, like close-spaced cordon rows, test them out, find the ones you want, then go through the trouble of growing those on their own roots, which is going to take a while. A couple years ago I had really bad bear problems. I got into a lower orchard down here and I was like, okay, I better protect this garden so they don't get in here. So I put up an electric fence wire around the whole thing, but it turns out bears are smart. They figured out that it was just the one white wire that was hot and burrowed under the fence and wrecked about 5 trees. Bears don't use ladders. They just grab the tree, snap it off, eat all the fruit, and move on to the next one. So I had this tree that was completely busted off after, a bunch of years of growth, like 5 or 6 years. And what am I going to do with it? Start over, dig it out, plant a new tree, and wait for, 6 years until that comes into bearing? Nope, I cut it off, grafted on a new variety growing up here, and eventually I'll cut most of this stuff off and just let that take over. So there was a study in the UK where they tested apples to see which ones were the most nutritious and had the most antioxidants and all that stuff. And the winner was this, Pendragon, a very rare red-fleshed apple. Well, I don't know how rare it is over there, but it's definitely rare in the States. Someone sent me a stick. I didn't even know they were sending it. It just showed up. And I was like, okay, I got to deal with this right now. Where do I put it? I just went and found a space on this tree. I grafted it on last minute, and here it is. It barely survived. It's, this is like 3 years old or 4 years old, and it's only 10 inches long, but it made it. So yeah, they didn't send me a tree. They didn't send me, I didn't have an extra rootstock laying around to graft it onto, and even if I did, then I would have had to make room for another tree, grow out that whole tree just to see if it's any good. So I slapped it on here last minute. It barely survived. It didn't grow the first year. I don't think it even grew the second year, and then last year it finally put on a 10-inch shoot. And now I can take this and graft it wherever else I want, make a whole tree if I like it. I'm already using it for breeding, collecting pollen from these few flowers and pollinating those. Grafting is useful. Great tool to have in your toolbox. Okay, these trees are planted on the oblique cordon system. They're 18 inches apart, they're on dwarfing rootstock, and each one has 1 to 2 varieties. Some of them have one variety halfway, and then there's another one grafted on for the second half. This is a great system for a small space. It's only 2 feet wide. You can keep it as short as you want. I usually keep it about 7 or 8 feet. And it's a great way to test a bunch of varieties in a small space, which is exactly what I'm doing here. But let's say you go online and you research a whole bunch of varieties and you get scions from 6 different people all over the country, send you scions that you want to try out. What do you do with them? There is not a source out there right now where you could not reproduce this. Not only convenient, but it may be your only option if you want to collect rare apples. Many of these are very rare, and they're just, there's just not anyone out there growing trees that are going to be ready to send you. And you may get lucky and find someone that'll graft, or you could collect the scions and send them to them and have them graft them and send them back, or grow them for a year and then send them back. But again, why not just graft it yourself? It's also cheaper. If you can trade for most of the scions, even if you have to buy them, hopefully you won't be much over $5 per tree. If you buy, your rootstock in a reasonable quantity, it should be under $2.50. Also, if I don't like anything in this system, it's really easy to just cut it off and graft something onto the already established roots, and within 2 or 3 years you could be getting fruit. This system is called interstem. So here we have a big, vigorous, deep, large root system that would normally grow a full-size big tree. But then we graft in a piece on top of that that is a dwarf rootstock, so that will grow a small tree. And then we graft the piece of wood that we want on top of that to grow into like the tree and make fruit, which is what we see here. That gives you a deep, full, self-reliant root system that is good for foraging, for water and nutrients. And then it chokes the top of the tree down to only about 8 foot tall, and it just sits here and makes fruit. Pretty cool. I have a whole series on that system and how to do it and all about it already, so check that out. And finally, here's this cool heart-shaped tree that I grafted. Creative potential. There's so much untapped creative potential for grafting. You could build structures, you could build objects, you could just do cool looking things like this with growing trees on a in your garden. There's just huge creative potential if you're willing to take risks and are patient, and I don't know, there's just so much. If I had a lifetime to live over, I'd do a lot more of that and a lot more kind of like long-term experiments. This one's kind of interesting because I grafted on 2 scions to the rootstock that were exactly the same size. I grew them up. I didn't grow them. I did this all in 1 year. I grafted down here, I brought them up, I bent them over, tied them to like a wire form, but the tips went down, and then I grafted another scion upright in between those two, and that actually had to grow. So the sap flow had to go down like this and then reverse and go up the scion and grow the tree. But it worked. You know, it was a bold experiment, but it worked, and here's the tree. It's probably never going to be like a self-supporting tree. I'll probably move it and put it against a trellis or something like that. But it's super cool. So yeah, creative potential. And of course it's fun. It's a fun thing. It gets you engaged with the outdoors, with like living, growing things. It, you know, sharpens your skills. You have to know how to be able to sharpen a knife and how to use it. You know, you get to do something and watch the results grow after that, and that's always good. Are you convinced? I hope you're convinced by now that this is worthwhile skill. So now I'm going to show you how to do it. And again, this will be most of what you need to know.